to predict the future is extremely useful. Some of the best companies out there, some of the projects you're using already, in terms of alpha projects in particular, have made their money because they've been able to do this. So what we're asking you to do today isn't just sort of passively accepting the future that comes along. It's trying to predict it and trying to shape it. So the angles that we're going to come up and try and cover are angles in terms of, sure, the technology, but also in terms of the evolution of the reader and the evolution of the content as well. So mine, Leanna's telling me eMag, mag prediction in 10 slides. And being futurologists, which will be this afternoon, sometimes it's also a good idea to go back and look at the history. And I know that our first years have done Dr. Potter's history module already, and the third years have already done quite a lot of culture and history. And the culture and history side, the scholarly side, is really useful because if you get used to sort of being able to make sense and predict patterns and trends in history, that will help you be able to predict them and see how they're going on into the future. So, okay, right. Okay, so the big issues that are affecting free content versus paid content, and looking at the impact. So essentially you've got a lot of free magazines, a lot of free websites. The internet has completely changed the perception. So ownership and stuff with firewalls. The internet has meant that, and the internet delivery of communication and information means that you don't, it's rare to really own the digital stuff that you're downloading. And we were talking about that yesterday, this idea that you sort of have got to a stage where you're basically hiring it. You're actually just sort of renting it out and using it. When I grew up as a teenager in the 80s, you bought a record, it was physical, you took it home, you owned that vinyl. I could have thrown it around the garden, I could have broken it, I could have lent it to a friend, I put it in my handbag and carried it around. It was mine. So I think in terms of digital, that's something that's a future prediction for you as futurologists. Work out really who owns it, how do you deal with ownership, and how do you manage the perception of that. Audience and readership, ways of reading. We're seeing this hybrid form where people aren't just readers, they're also an audience, and they want to be passively entertained, but they also want to involve themselves with the content. And we're seeing this with especially the online newspapers, where they're a hybrid and a mix of opinion as well as news, and the newspapers that are perhaps just news are feeling a little bit too sort of passive. And audiences, they want to be a reader, but they also want to be an audience as well. They want to be entertained, they want to be absorbed by the content, but they also want to be able to control it and be amused by it. Who will be reading this in the future? Luddites or young'uns. As futurologists, you need to be able to predict who is accessing this stuff and how, because different people in different life cycles will access this stuff in different ways. How my mother uses the internet at 77 is very different from, say, how I'm using the internet and managing content and downloading things. And I suspect how you guys are using the internet is very different for me, because there's a good 20 years difference. So you need to be thinking about that as well, with the patterns and the trends that you're seeing already. Apps or e-paper, I think just because you can put something in a particular format doesn't mean you should. And as futurologists, that's particularly important, I think. You're trying to guess how people want to access the information. One of the best pieces of clothing advice I ever got was, just because it fits doesn't mean you should buy it. And it's the same with technology and how you use it. Distribution, growing middle class and challenging geography. Distribution isn't just confined to the comfortable settings that you're living in. And as futurologists, how much is the world going to shrink, essentially? How much more will you be doing business and selling content to people in India or people in China? Or how much integrated will Denmark become, with Dutch, with the sort of Dutch projects you're producing, and the UK, etc. How much will, say, the imperialism of language affect technology? So I'm speaking to you in English, but I'm doing this in Amsterdam. That's actually quite a profound change to education. And you're probably, and the way you're accessing your technology, which language are you accessing it in? So that's something you also need to think about. Content competition. Playboy is a good example of this. So everything that Playboy does that made it unique and fancy in the 50s, I believe you can get naked ladies on the website now. So, hi, take 16. Hi. So, content. Who's in 10 years' time? This content that you think will be so unique now. Where's that going to be? Where are you going to be able to get that? Who is going to be able to access and where? And user habits and download patterns. The patterns that you are able to make some sense of now. Patterns of behavior, patterns of accessing information, or just the stuff that you're reading for fun and interest. Those patterns are your future. They're sort of basically giveaways of what's going to happen in 10 years. So that's the main issues. Right, let's scroll through my slides. At the moment, magazines, looking at eMags and Mags, magazines like Cosmopolitan and Elle and all the rest would group readers together in terms of life cycle. Okay? So it'd be like if you were a woman between the ages of 18 and 24, you obviously were interested in X, Y, and Z, which was an enormous assumption. The best magazines, and what we're seeing with patterns and trends, is that they're lumping people together in terms of what interests them, okay? Rather than just, oh, you're 18 to 24, clearly you're into this shit. And be like, actually, I'm not, So Star Wars is a good example. I love Star Wars. Star Wars makes me so happy I could cry. I have loads in common with the other nerds who like Star Wars, who might be age 50, who might be age 12. My godson, who's 6, loves Star Wars. There's a big age gap, but we're brought together. And geographically, as the world is shrinking, that's a better way of reaching people. So essentially we're looking at niche. And why niche? Well, because niche has the power to work across geographical and cultural borders, which is really important for you guys as futurologists, as those borders break down. So an international project relies on community, which of course benefits the brand, because if you're in a community, you're more loyal to the brand, and I think that's quite successful. And then this comes back to McLuhan. Have you been looking at Marshall McLuhan? Thank God. Talks about a global village. But in this crowded world where people have loads of identities, if you have a small community, you kind of know where you are in the world. You have roots. And that might be down to your interest in Star Wars or your interest in fancy cats. Community, in order to be a community, and these 4 things you should write down really. Membership, so you feel you belong. Influence, so you have some say in your community. Integration, so you have things in common. And fulfillment of needs. Desire and needs are very important to people. More important than you realise. And very important, I think, as we go along. So my niche publication today is the lovely title, Girls and Corpses. And Teddy Bear. So Teddy Bear Times is interesting because these people are brought together from all around the world because they like to make teddy bears. Now that's quite specialist. That's a specialist hobby and interest. Girls and Corpses, that's a fucking awesome title, brings together satire and scarcity ladies, and it's essentially, it's a satire, it's a piss take of lads' mags. So what makes it quite interesting, although it has obviously sort of marginally amusing necrophiliac messages, people are brought together by their sense of culture, their sense of humour, which is very important. Sense of humour can link people. One of the reasons why we keep coming here is because we get on really well with your Dutch tutors. If they were horrible or they thought we were assholes, it would never work. So linking people together with humour is very, very important. So how sub-niche can you go? Well, you can dig deeper and deeper and deeper. So you can link people together with humour, and then what people funny is then a whole load of subcategories. And that's also, so by linking to people with niche and sort of linking into the social identity, you then think, how am I going to reach them? So you need to be innovative to match the innovation in what they're into. And David Reynard says that essentially, as a future prediction, the last magazine won't be these broad magazines that reach people in terms of life cycle, they're very, very, very boiled down in terms of style press. So they're so the style press is being the very expensive high production values like Vogue or Elle, okay? And they have an unusual design and high production content, but also think about the innovation of their delivery, okay? Yeah, still 10 minutes, thank you.
And 30 seconds.
Still within 10